I'm going to demonstrate something I meant to put on the last video when I was discussing ways to develop your time. And this is one where I play 2 triple paradiddles followed by 7 single strokes. And I accent the beginning of the paradiddles and the beginning of the 7 strokes. The idea again is that the paradiddle is a phrase, and when you play that odd grouping, it forces that paradiddle into the next inversion, or into an inversion of the triple paradiddle. And in this case, since triple paradiddle has 8 notes in it, there are 8 places in time it can start relative to the downbeat. So this is one step in finer resolution of time than what I discussed in the last video, doing these sort of things with 16th notes and 16th triplets, where you're dealing with 4 or 6. Now you're dealing with 8. So it's even a finer little slice of time you're trying to hear and moving an idea around in that space. Anyway, here's the idea. Anyway, that's the idea. For some reason I had a little mental hiccup and left one foot tap out. But that's the idea as you play it. Now, this idea of shifting by eighths, for most of you in the beginning, I would say to use even amounts at first. And what I mean by that is you're playing your triple paradiddles, you can do 2 of them, and then do 2 single strokes. Now when you do that, you're going to shift the paradiddle over by a 16th note position each time, which is a little easier to hear and to follow. And doing your triple paradiddle that way is sort of like a double time to the 16th note pulse. So you're still moving in an even amount. Your right hand and left hand, it'll be a little easier to sort out how to keep your feet in time. And then when you get the even amounts, well, one more thing about the even amounts. If you do 2 or 6, you will shift the paradiddle one way or the other way. If you do 4, you're only going to move the paradiddle over to and. So it'll go from the downbeat to the and back to the downbeat when you do 4. But 2 or 6 will shift you by 1/16, and you'll go through all 4 positions that are sort of like what I would call a double time expression. Anyway, experiment with evens. When you can do that and keep your feet in time with everything, then experiment with the odd numbers. I personally find 1 or 7 easier to do than 3 or 5. Today, I'm going to discuss some questions I'm getting from you guys that have been studying with me and watching the videos and sending me questions about stuff. So I want to clear up a few little details about the 5-page handout you can download. If you watch the first video at the end, there's a link to where you can grab that. Now, those sheets in the handout start with something called the roll chart. And that was about 50% of the lesson time when I studied with Murray and Richard. Both of them would spend a lot of time with you correcting what was happening in your fingers or your hand or your arm and making sure you understand how to make a stroke, how to make the accent, how to play the rebounds. They really wanted you to get that correctly so that when you're practicing, you're making the motions correctly, and that would help you develop everything and get it working in your nervous system. Because part of this is you have to practice it enough to get it into your muscle memory so it just functions for you when you play. You don't want to be thinking about technique or how you're holding the stick when you're supposed to be making music. You want your technique to just work and serve you, be able to focus on playing music, not, gee, how am I holding the stick? You want that to internalize. Now, you guys that have been studying timpani grip and moving your fingers, as you can see, I understand timpani grip. I played timpani for 3 or 4 years. But that motion has nothing to do with what we're doing here, okay? Instead of motivating the stick with my finger, I motivate the stick from the wrist. And the fingers move based on the angle of my wrist. And I show this in a lot of the videos, watch them. But the idea is that the angle of the wrist, when you're relaxed with the hand, that angle opens or closes the fingers. And I'm going to extremes here till you see what I'm talking about. The fingers open and close all by themselves. I'm not moving the fingers and grabbing. I'm moving the wrist and everything else is loose. Now, what does that mean for playing? Well, as I mentioned, these 2 fingers are guides on the side of the sticks. They're holding the stick and guiding it, but these 3 fingers, primarily the middle one, because that's where the weight sits, those 3 fingers open and close depending on how far down. You can see them move. I'm exaggerating, but you can see them open and close. When I'm playing, that difference is so tiny, I only move down that much, and the fingers open just a little bit, all by themselves. Now, the stick is supported by the fingers, not held. If you're trying to hold the stick with the fingers, that pressure the stick responds to. What you want is no pressure. What does that mean, no pressure? Well, I'm sitting on this seat. There's no pressure holding me except for the full force of gravity holding me here. Gravity holds me on the chair. I don't feel like I'm going to fall over. I'm not going anywhere. And the seat isn't grabbing my ass. And you don't want to grab the stick with your fingers. That isn't what this is about. They are just under the stick, and the stick is resting there, just like I'm resting here. Okay? It's the same, exact same thing. It just sits in your hand, in the crack of the middle finger. Then you hold it with gentle pressure between the fingers. Well, how much pressure? What does that mean? That's one of the questions I get from people. How tight should I be holding it? Well, you're going to have to figure this out by your sense of touch. Now, all I can say is it is gentle. This is only, what, 8 or 9 grams maybe? 5 grams? It's nothing. It's just a little piece of wood. So if you're holding onto it like it's a dumbbell or something, you're overdoing things quite a bit. The amount of pressure I have in the guide fingers is, it does change very slightly depending on how loud or soft I'm playing. But I don't change it on purpose. It's not something I determine. It is as simple as what you do every night when you eat dinner and you have a glass of something to drink. Is the glass full? Is it full of water and ice cubes? Or is it down to the very bottom and only has this much fluid in it? Well, you don't think about it. You just hold the glass with the right amount of pressure. If it's light, you hold it at one pressure. If it's heavy, if it's a big, heavy glass mug with a handle, you're going to hold it more firmly. Your sense of touch dictates how much pressure to hold with. And your sense of touch knows. You just know. And it's the same thing with this. Your sense of touch will tell you how much force are you moving with, how much do you need to hold it so it doesn't launch out of your hand and go flying. You just want to hold it with enough pressure that it is secure and doesn't feel like it's moving and want to launch out of your hand from the motion you're giving the stick. I can't teach that to you. You learn that by practicing holding the stick and playing different strokes. And when you play louder or softer and you move it around your drums, you will gain that perception of what to do. It's something you have to teach yourself. But you already know. You never practiced, I gotta hold the glass tighter. You just pick it up and do it. And that's where you want to be with drum technique. It's just something you do when you play. But like I said, if you got other habits, you've been shoving down into the drum as hard as you can instead of just lifting, you have some corrections to make in what you're doing. And the hand wants to do what you practice. So if you've been yanking with your fingers, you're going to discover that, damn, my fingers keep yanking, and it may be difficult to do nothing with the fingers at first. So it's something you have to teach yourself. Now, going on to those pages in the handout, the roll chart, which is a big part of what Richard wanted you to do and Murray wanted you to do, and Murray didn't ask for it, but Richard insisted that you keep time with both feet with the metronome. He felt that sitting there practicing your hands for hours on end and getting your technique together, you were leaving out half your body. And when you go out and play, your feet are going to have to play something against all this technique you're developing. So learn to at least, in the beginning, play time with your feet against all this stuff. Once you accomplish that, then experiment with double strokes in your feet or paradiddles with your feet. You can change up the sticking with your feet. But first you have to know how to keep good time and use both feet, not just your right. Your left, if you're a right-hander, is your weakest element, so don't ignore it, use it. Okay, so in Murray and Richard's world, you can start the roll with either hand, left or right. And you should be able to keep your time in your feet either way, right or left-handed. That is part of practicing the roll chart. Do it left-handed some days, do it right-handed some days. That will help you get everything going evenly. Now, the other part of the roll chart that's very important is to memorize every roll's name, and also the key number for it is how many times do you move your wrist to play a particular roll. Well, our shortest roll is the 5-stroke roll. It has 3 counts. Our longest roll, traditionally in Rudiments, is the 17-stroke roll, and it has 9 counts. You move your hands 9 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now here's another thing that happens when you start alternating rolls. If you start the roll with your right hand with the feet and the metronome, when you get to the second roll, it starts on the left hand, but the foot isn't with the left hand, it's still with the right. So you go 1, 2. You're not on the first note like you are when you start the roll with your right hand. It's on 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So the foot stays with the right hand. Whether you alternate a roll or don't alternate a roll, your foot will stay with whatever hand you start with. That's why you want to start with left some days, start with right some days, so both sides of your nervous system get used to rolls going either hand, either direction. That will give you a lot of freedom in expression when you want to start playing rolls on the drum set and crashing cymbals and moving to tom-toms. So, time with your feet. Count the roll by how many motions it makes. Now here's the other thing you're dealing with, is the upstroke in the roll. Where do you make that up motion to get a flam on whatever hand you want? You want to be able to execute any length roll and play the accent 1 or 2 at the end of the roll, whatever kind of roll it is. Now, if you look at those sheets, I've marked where the upstroke occurs on every one of the rolls. It's marked. The word up is underneath, and there's an arrow that goes to the accent. That arcing arrow is to show you where you make the upstroke. But if you look close, right after that arrow goes up, there's a dotted line that goes up to that arrow. What's that dotted line about? Well, what I'm trying to get you aware of is that when you play slow, you bend down for the rebound. Or you may be turning your wrist because you're playing louder, but when you get to that floor, you still have to bend slightly to open the fulcrum, make the hand release a little pressure to get a rebound. So, when you make an upstroke then, whether you're playing loud with a wrist turn into the rebound or whether you're just playing soft and bending down, that rebound has to complete itself, whether you play it loud or soft. You want both notes on the bottom of the bead, as Richard would call that. Make sure you're on the bottom of the bead for the rebounds. That way you get 2 equal notes. You don't want to go stroke. If you start up right on the number 2, like a 7-stroke roll, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. You want to finish that bounce 2 on a parallel line there on the bottom of the bead before you start lifting the energy to create the accent. So you don't want to go 1, 2 because you'll get the tip on the second beat if you lift right on 2. So the reality is I go 2 and I move up. After I feel the stick move over the fulcrum is when I start lifting it. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the rebound is even, then it comes up. That's what the dotted line is indicating. That in reality, it's slightly after count 2 that you move up. It's just a millisecond of time when you're playing fast. When you get up to roll tempos, that up and down happens. It feels like it's happening when you play a 7-stroke roll when you say 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. But it's 2. It bends down and opens on 2. And you got to feel that before you lift up. So it's not exactly mechanically in time. It's when the moment to lift is after you feel the stick move over the fulcrum for the second note. Then you can lift it up and throw it down for the accent. That's what those dotted lines are indicating on all the rolls. And that's something I wanted to point out to you guys because I'm not there giving you a lesson. I don't know what speed you're practicing at. But in Murray's world, you start this at 120. I'm guessing it's about 120. But at 120, it feels like one motion up and down because you open pretty quick and come right back. And that's where you start with this. You learn to make the upstroke in time. Then the process is slowing the rolls down. You go down from 120, 4 or 5 points, 4 or 5 points, 8 points each time, to where you can still control things. You don't want to lose control of this. But when you get down to 80, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, you really have time to feel the hand open and then make the stroke. And that is the point of slowing down. It helps you learn to bend and open. I'm not letting go. I'm sorry. When the hand opens, it just releases pressure by itself. I use the word open because it does open, but it's more a pressure change in the fulcrum. That's what's really going on, a tiny pressure change. But the pressure is less and you have to bend down more to take pressure off the fulcrum so the stick bounces slower. And that's what you're learning by slowing down, is how to increase the amount of pressure release in the fulcrum till you can get to as open as you can go without dropping the stick. And that's at 80. You try to do this below 80, it doesn't work because the stick's going to bounce at a certain speed when you bend down, and it won't go any slower than 80 without throwing the bounce. That gives it enough energy to go slower. But I wouldn't play slow doubles with slow throws because you can just tap the wrist. The purpose of slowing down that slow with rebounds is to feel the fulcrum and get that stick locked into the fulcrum so it sits there and you really feel it. And that's what will come if you work your rolls down from 120 to 80. That stick will start to dance over your fulcrum with the slightest motion in your hands. Now, once you've gotten down there, then you turn around and go back up. And you work on the roll chart and getting your rolls faster and your up and downs faster, and everything gets smaller as you go faster. There's less motion as you go faster. Now, the other difficulty with the roll chart, and this will take you a year or two or maybe 3 or 4 to get to, but as you work on these things, when you get faster, this is a little different with every student, depending how big your hands are, how tense or loose you are, where you are, and what you're practicing. There are variabilities that I have to deal with every student, okay? But somewhere between 172 and 188, every drummer or student starts to encounter the issue that as you get faster up to those other tempos, it's harder to keep the roll open and stay as 2 strokes. What am I saying to you? Well, when you move faster, your pressure in your hand has to increase a little bit to hold onto the stick so it doesn't launch out of your hand. And that increased pressure creates a little tension across the wrist that you're trying to turn. So you kind of have a tension against which you're moving, and that pressure in there wants to speed up the stick. So you go from 2 to getting 3s or buzzes, however you want to think of it. I don't think of it as a buzz, it's just a multiple bounce. But when you get up around 180 or so, the stick wants to close. So you'll find at 200 that you have to be a little more aware of that pressure in the fulcrum to keep it open. It has to stay loose and not want to hold on more, which is the tendency as you go faster. You want to hang on a little more. So yeah, that's the difficulty at fast tempos, is how do you keep these back fingers relaxed but still hold on here with enough pressure to keep that wood secure. So there's a little dance of pressures going on in your hand at above 172. You might not encounter it till you get to 188. If you're good and loose with your wrist turns and you're naturally fast, you'll encounter this at a higher speed the faster you are. If you're a slower drummer like me, I ran into it around 180 and had to start figuring it out as I got up to 200. So everybody's a little different. But that's what occurs when you play the rolls and try to head for 208, the top speed on the old classical metronomes. If you want to play at 300, I don't know why you would need to do that with a roll, because once you play a roll at 200, it's a roll. It's still going to be a roll if you play at 300. It'll just feel more tense, but the drum, to the person listening to you 40 feet away, when you play a roll at 200 or you play a roll at 300, it's just a long tone to them. The drum goes ba. They don't hear those attacks you're making. They don't feel those attacks you're making. They're not trained drummers. They haven't sat there for 5 or 10 years working on rolls. They're just an audience listening to music. It's just vibration bouncing off them. Makes them feel good. That's why they're there. So don't obsess unnecessarily on tempos, 300, making everything go super fast, because the reality is, to the audience, They don't hear notes that fast. You do. You've trained your nervous system to play them and perceive them. But they don't hear that. All they hear is a long tone. A roll is a long tone. And like I said, once you play 16th notes above 200 on a snare drum, it's a roll. That's what the audience hears and feels. A long note. Ba. They don't hear all those notes you're hammering out. So, enough about the roll chart. Make sure you use your feet all the time. Learn all the rolls by their name and how many counts they have. And how many counts they have, that idea of using the numbers between 3 and 9 will become very valuable in the next video I'm going to make about you guys, for you guys, and I'll explain that relationship between the roll chart and how you count it, and how you count all the polyrhythms and tuplets and other things that go on in drumming. They're all interrelated. And if you can count to 9, you can count them all. That's for another day. Now, I want to go on. The first 3 pages in that handout covered all the rolls in the roll chart. Now, page 4 has all the flam, basic flam motions on it, okay? And the first thing, of course, is the flam. And that's where Murray teaches you the idea of a stroke. That's what he calls this, a stroke. And he also adds the word downstroke, because there also is an upstroke. And he doesn't mention that right away. First, he just wants you to make a stroke, play the flam, and understand how to tap a grace note before it. You can play it pretty open so it goes da-da, or you can bring it in pretty tight. And if you play them at the same time like that, they choke, and it goes goop, and you'll feel that. If you play both sticks on the drum at precisely the same moment, you'll feel it. It goes goop. I don't know how to describe it. The sound chokes when both hits it perfectly. That's called a flat flam, and it's something to be avoided when you're trying to play a flam. If you're playing a double stop on 2 drums, well, it can be a flam or it can be a unison where they hit at the same time, because you won't have that flat flam effect when they hit at the same moment. So unisons are valuable when you play 2 different sounds, but when you're on one surface, you want to do a flam. You want the notes slightly apart from each other, or you can put them a little more apart and get kalum, kalum. That's your choice. That's where you place the grace note in relation to the stroke. So, flam one way teaches you how to make a right hand stroke. Flam the other way teaches you how to make a left hand stroke. Now, in all the drum books, we alternate the flam, but before Murray does that, he shows you the flam and stroke. Why? Because it isolates this idea of going up into a flam, upstroke into a flam. You're doing one hand at a time, and then teach yourself how to go upstroke, flam, upstroke, flam. You have to learn that upstroke preparation for a flam. Once you feel that from the flam and stroke, then he would take you back to the flam and go, okay, well, do that when you play a flam, but now that upstroke into the flam has to occur after you make the downstroke for the flam. So your grace note of the flam becomes the upstroke for the opposite hand. Make sense? Then Murray would take, or Richard, both of them, would take one hand away and show you that, okay, well look, you're going down and up in one hand. That's the motion. And then they would just take the other hand and go, well, you see now that, oh, when you play 16th notes, it's the same thing as alternating the flam. It's an up and down stroke. That's the process Murray went through with me. It's the same process I imagine he does with everyone. Is he wants you to see how the motions are interrelated and are integrated into all the things we play. Now, then after you do the faint and flam and the alternated flam, then he would go, okay, well, the next rudiment, the first one he said was the faint and flam, and then if you look, the word reverses. It says flam and faint. But now instead of the rudiment being 2 equal eighth notes, you have a dotted eighth note and a 16th note. And now that faint is the 16th note. A 1 and a 2 and. Why is that after the faint and flam? Because now you have to go up and down in a 16th note instead of at the speed of an 8th note, like you have in the faint and flam. So the faint and flam is an 8th note upstroke. The flam and faint is a 16th note upstroke. The difference is, well, he made it 1/16 more difficult than it was before. And that's what happens in the drum book that I wrote about Murray and Richard and all the rudiments. The rudiments, that's the joke in the title. The natural and logical order of succession. That's just an inside joke Richard made about what was going on, and I decided to use that as the title for the book. Okay, I know it's sort of pedantic, but if you knew Richard, then you'd understand it's just sort of a joke about it. Okay, but anyway, there is a natural and logical order to all this stuff, and that's what Murray's genius was about and how he organized all that and presented it to all the students. Each step through the book, the next rudiment or group of stickings is just a little harder than the one before. And by doing that, each rudiment leads you all the way through the strokes up to the most complicated combinations of the motions, of strokes, rebounds, and wrist turns. Everything breaks down to singles, doubles, and strokes with a little variation, the up and down stroke. Okay? But pretty much that's 99.8% of what we're doing. Now, there is one more flam rudiment on that page. I talked about flams, faint and flam, flam and faint. And then if you look, there's one that says flam and stroke. And it's notated with a right flam, a left accent, a left flam, and a right accent. Well, each rudiment is a step a little more difficult. Now the step is you have to figure out how to make downstrokes with two different velocities, because the flam has one velocity, but the accent has to have more velocity because it's accented. It's louder than the flam. So now you're learning to go accent, flam. And you go, what? It says flam first. Well, if you look at what the hands are doing, the right hand, if you look at the end of the exercise, 1 and 2, and it's a right hand, and it's accented. And if you start that rudiment on that and, you go and then you go back to the beginning with a right hand flam. And 1. So when you play this rudiment, the flam and stroke, even though it says flam and stroke, when you physically move, it feels like you're starting on the and going and 1, and 2. You're making 2 downstrokes, the first one with more velocity than the second one. So you have to throw harder, throw less. 2 different, got to become aware of the fact that not every throw is the same. Might be accented, might not be accented, and later you'll learn that, oh, it can even be something that energizes multiple rebounds. It takes a little while to get to that. First you learn what's on that first page with the flam and stroke. Now after that, the very last one on the page, it says ta-tlum, ta-tlum. That's just the words Murray used to teach it to you, because in the old days, the sound, the name of the rudiment was how they used to teach people in the 1890s and early 1900s. Flam. You know, the words were supposed to be like what it sounded like. Ta-tlum, ta-tlum. The idea with this little fragment is that you have to learn how to bounce and let that second note of the rebound be a grace note for the flam. Now when Murray writes it out for you, he writes it out as a dotted 8th note to a 16th note. 1 and a 2 and a 1 and. Because most of us, when we bend, we're bouncing pretty fast. We haven't worked the roll stroke down to 80. Okay, so that's why he starts you off with that as the 16th note. A 1, and a 2, and a 1, you know. Anyway, ta-tlum, a rebound into a flam. Now, Murray states that that isn't a rudiment, but if you look at the Wilcoxon book, Rudimental Swing Solos, he has all his rudimental patterns in there, and there's a rudiment called the Flam accent number 2. And that is a ta-tlum alternating, but in the rhythm of a triplet, or I forget, it might be written in 6/8 time as 6/8 notes, or it might be written as a triplet. But it's the same either way. So if you alternate the ta-tlum, it can be a triplet, 1 and a, 2 and a, 3 and a, 4 and a, it can be 6/8. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's the same thing either way. Doesn't really matter. But is Flam accent number 2 is ta-tlums alternated. Now, what I'm getting at now and what Murray is getting at is that ta-tlum is a part of most of the Flam rudiments. The other reason he wants you to get started with it is later, when you finally get started in the stick control book with him, in the Flam sections of the stick control book, you're going to have to know how to play a ta-tlum. By the time he gets you to stick control, your hand's already doing it because you've gone through enough rudiments and basic things to get that ta-tlum happening. Now, okay, so let me prove what I was talking about. Flam accent number 1, as opposed to number 2, simply fills in the triplet. Instead of it shuffling, you're now to put in the middle note, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 1 and a, 2 and a, it can be triplets or 6/8. But there's the ta-tlum as you go back and forth. Flam accent 2 adds an upstroke in the middle. It's one step harder than the other one. Now, that leads us to a lot of other Flam rudiments, and I'm kind of jumping beyond where those first 3 pages are. But I just want to talk about a little bit what will happen, why you practice these things, and what it will lead to in your hand. Once you get used to that idea of bouncing into flams, and you've gone through enough rudiments, you get up to the paradiddles, and then you start getting into the flams and stuff. Once you get to paradiddles, Murray would start you at the beginning of stick control. And you would have to go through all those exercises, through all the roll exercises, before you get to the flams. The flams are about halfway through the book, so you got some work to do. But working on all those rolls that go from roll to sticking, roll to different sticking, forces your hand to change pressure to execute those strokes. And that's how you get this stuff into your muscle memory, so it just works when you play, you don't think about it. Now, there's something I showed you just a second ago. I was talking about how Murray approached the up and down motion, and how he showed you how playing 16th notes was the same as alternating flams. The hand was making an up-down motion. And of course he has the triplets there. Well, that makes you, now you have to move the motion from hand to hand instead of just isolated on one side. But it still is an up and down stroke, upstroke to a downstroke. Okay, those 3 pages get you doing grace notes and up and down strokes and the accent motion of the stroke, and of course the roll chart. And that's where you start with all this. Now I'm going to jump up to some a little more advanced things that happen later, and I got to be honest with you, most of you aren't ready for this, but if you've already been playing drums for 10 or 20 years, you've already done all this stuff in stick control. You might have done it with a different grip or a different approach, but so I'm going to give you a little bit different way to approach all this stuff a little bit, because I want to make you aware of the ta-tlum. when you play, it's called an alternative way of sticking a Flam accent number 2. It's something called the Swiss triplet. Well, a Flam accent number 1 is an alternated triplet with a Flam. A Swiss triplet is a Flam triplet that doesn't alternate. So you're making that throw for the 2. There's the third note of the triplet, and that third note bounces into the Flam. So it's a ta-tum. The only difference is now you're bouncing this hand. Ta-tum one way. Swiss triplet one way. It's basically almost the same thing. So, I teach the Swiss triplet then as a ta-tum that you let bounce. Because an accent, flams generally have an accent on them. And a flam by its very nature is louder than a single note. Takes up more volume because of that grace note. So, Swiss triplets then lead you, well, if you can throw the Flam for 2, you can throw it again over here. But even though it sounds like 2, it's 3. 1, 2, 3. The third bounce is fading away to a grace note. In other words, I just let the rebound decay over my hand. It will naturally slow down and give you a grace note. And I like to give a little attack on my flams. I don't want them all to be smooth and connected. I'm not playing classical music. Playing on a drum set against amplified instruments. So I want a little attack, a little bite on my flams. I don't play a Swiss triplet just, how do we describe it? I've seen some people online teaching the Swiss triplet as if it's a roll, that you overlap the rebounds. Well, it sort of feels like that, but that doesn't give you the downstroke on the flam. It just makes it sound like a roll that's kind of off kilter. That isn't really what I'm going for when I play Swiss triplets. I hear that flam, blap, 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 1 into 2 into 3 into. That's the way I play them. I don't make everything a delicate rebound when I do that. It's your choice. You can do it either way. Okay, flam taps lead to something that a lot of drummers call windmills. Sort of sound like flam paradiddles, but the diddles at the beginning instead of the end. And there's double windmill or a triple windmill. Swiss triplets, windmills. They all feel sort of the same. They're all related to that throwing a flam with a rebound. So those rudiments are easy to play around with and move between because they all kind of feel like the same motion. Now, that leads us to something else about tatlums. You get into the more advanced flam rudiments, which I'm sure you guys have all, if you've been playing drums for a while, you're aware of them. So how do you use this technique to play things like flam paradiddles? Well, in a way, when you get to the diddle, of the flam paradiddle, you're going to have 3 bounces followed by an upstroke. So your diddle decays into that next flam and then you make an upstroke. I guess you could call that a ta-ta-tlum. Murray never used that word, but that, in essence, is what is happening. It's going ta-ta-tlum, upstroke. So in a way, when before Murray takes you to those flam rudiments like flam paradiddles and stuff, you're already working on the flam sections in stick control, which means you've already done the first page of stick control where he introduces you to throwing for 3 and 4 rebounds. So you've been playing with those motions for a while before he introduces you to flam paradiddles and what's going on there. But being able to bounce 4 kind of helps you play a flam paradiddle, because the paradiddle goes diddle, grace note, upstroke. Well, if you're playing 4 and making an upstroke, it's sort of the same thing. Slight difference than if it's just 4 rebounds by itself. It's 3 bounds, the hand finishes the rebound and you make an upstroke. It's a little different as opposed to finishing the rebound on the 4th note. So that's bouncing 3, then going up on 4. But you can also go down for 2, up for 2, which is a different thing. Now, once you get towards the end of the flam rudiments and you're doing multiple bounces, that's in the stick control section of the flam rudiments. I think it's exercise 13 or 16 or 18. It's over on the second column, about 2/3 of the way down. But you'll see a sticking error in stick control in the flam section that goes right, right, left, left, right, right, left, left, right, right. So the 4 notes reverse. So it sort of looks like a flammed double strokes, and then you flam and double stroke the other way. What is that? Well, that's where Murray points out to the fact that, well, you're going 2 down on the one, that's the down, but then you go up, down, 2 up, 2 down. It's bouncing. I bounce 2, bounce 2, throw it down, bounce 2, throw it down. And if you just let the weight come down, it'll be equal in sound. If you add a little thrust, you can get an accent. So that leads to one-handed playing in a way. And that's where Murray shows you, well, you can do it with 3 notes, 1 down, and then you play a rebound and come up. Well, you've been doing double strokes in the roll chart, playing 2 notes and going up, but now you come down immediately. You can add force or not. That's up to you. What are you trying to play by playing with one hand? But getting that fulcrum developed enough that you feel that stick dancing on that point, you can go up and down like you're playing 16th notes. Or you can take the accent away and let the stick rock over the fulcrum in a rebound, and then you don't have that accent on the first note. By adding thrust, you can make the down note louder, or don't add thrust, just let the weight drop, and it's even. 3, down, up, 2, down, down, up, 2, down, 2, up, 2, down, 2, up. 3, that for? Personally, I do the down, up thing when I'm playing 16th notes on a hi-hat, doing some sort of funk or halftime beat on a song. And I generally give a little bit of an attack on the downbeat. One thing I use that for. But the other thing I find is when I'm running around the drums playing single strokes, I'm trying to play, fast singles around the drums. Turning your wrist over and over and over is like running and sprinting. I can only sprint so far. And the same thing sort of happens in your hand. You can only turn at top speed, for so long, and you get a fatigue factor. And that's where this little throwing thing, so I'm turning, and when I feel that fatigue, I give some throws, and it's like, oh yeah, relaxing, falling to the floor. And it helps take some of the tension out of just turning. I'm not just sprinting, it like gives a little rebound to the sprint. I don't know how to describe it other than that, but I notice that's what I do when I'm running around doing singles up and down the drums. I notice sometimes that I start making those motions rather than just turning constantly the same speed. And it also adds a little...
contact information for Steven before I can do that. Who do you want to call?
Fuck. Shut up, Siri.
No problem. I won't.
Stupid phones. Anyway, sorry Siri interrupted us.
Okay.
Shut up, Siri! God, she's stupid. Apple. Anyway, enough about all that. Hope that helps you understand what the purpose of the tatlum is. Now, if you're just getting started on this idea of tatlum, another way you can practice it, which is not just sitting there going tatlum, tatlum, but to integrate it into your playing, is take an accent pattern you already like to play. A simple example would be playing clave. So a Brazilian clave using bossa nova, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and real traditional bossa nova clave accompaniment. You can do that on the drum with tatlums. You can start right-handed or left-handed. But that makes you go back and forth with your flams and play the tatlums. Take accent patterns you already know you like to play, that you play with single notes, and start adding your flams. That will help you get those tatlums into your playing and get your flams into your playing. Now, one little thing that has nothing to do with Richard or Murray, but flams, something I have heard Tony Williams do, and I've heard Vinny Caluta, he's lifted it from Tony. The idea is that a tom-tom rings and a snare drum is short. It goes bap, and the tom goes boom. And something very cool that I've heard Vinny and Tony Williams do is to play a flam, but play the grace note on the tom-tom. When you do that, the tom goes boo, but the snare goes bap, and you get a boo-bap, boo-bap. It's a really neat sound when that tom rings past the attack of the flam. And that is something you should mess around with on your drums. You can put the attack of the flam on a drum, or you can put the grace note of the flam on a tom. And you should play with patterns and see the difference between them. But those are ways to add flams to your playing, and the flams are on two surfaces. Of course, you can always play a flam on one drum. But, well, I just wanted to share a little Tony Williams, Vinny Caluta type thing that if you listen to them play, you will hear and see them. You can see these things online. I've seen Tony doing that. Bloop, 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 and he plays that tom pretty open. Boom bap, boom bap, boom bap. He doesn't make it a real tight flam when he does that. So, something you can goof around with with flams on your drum, add a little vocabulary to your flam playing on the drum set. Stolen from Tony Williams. Anyway, enough about flams for today. The next video I am going to get into the subject of one of my other books, which is, the book is titled Playing with the Odds, because it's all about using odd amounts and odd groupings and how to count them and how to add them into your playing. But the purpose was to teach you how to play them and count them. Then it's up to you to orchestrate them and use them in your playing. But that's what I'll get into a little bit next time. I want to show you guys how to play odd amounts and divide them in half with your feet, or in thirds with your feet, or in quarters, or 4. In other words, your feet are playing in 2 or 3 or 4 while you play even or odd amounts with your hands, and get an idea how to add all those odd amounts, which are already, they exist in between all the even amounts you've learned to play. You've learned to play eighth notes and quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, 32nd notes. Well, that's 1, 2, 4, or 8. And 16th triplets give you 6 notes to a beat. You know, regular triplets are 3, 16ths give you 6. So you have only one odd number there, the triplet, 3. But you can play 5 notes over 1 beat, or 5 notes over 2 beats, or 5 notes over 3 beats, or 5 notes over 4 beats. All the odd numbers can move against the metronome just like your even numbers do, but it adds a certain dimension that's different than the even numbers. And that's why everybody avoids the odd numbers, because they're odd and they're difficult to do at first. But if you start counting them and playing them, after about 6 months or a year, your brain will suddenly go, oh, I get it. They're just the speeds in between the other ones. And now you can speed up and slow down linearly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Instead of 1, 2, 4, 6, 8. Jumping from speed to speed. No, now you can do it in between. And once you learn that skill, now you can jump around to any amount you want. 5, 2, 7, 6, 3, 4. You just start to hear them as individual speeds, and you know where they are. And now you can play stuff that other drummers will go, huh? What's he doing? Because they never practice the odd numbers. They just kind of think there's something weird going on, and they don't know what it is. But once you teach yourself to hear it, you will appreciate how many people are using these things. One person I'm kind of enjoying lately is a woman by the name of Anika Niles. I've heard her play groups of 5 against 2 beats quite a bit in some of her fills, and sounds great, you know. There's also a young girl from China. She's like 8 or 9 years old, and she's doing things like that at 8 or 9. So the rest of us have a ways to catch up with some of these new people coming up. Anyway, next videos we'll deal with some oddness and weirdness and try to make it more acceptable to your brain. Have fun. Hope this video helps you guys.